The thing about prejudice is that it often wears expensive cologne and carries itself with an air of authority. Tonight, it's dressed in a tailored black suit and stands behind a mahogany podium at La Maison, one of Atlanta's most prestigious French restaurants. I apologize, but we're fully committed this evening. Marcus Camden's voice carries that particular tone of manufactured regret, the kind reserved for people he's already decided don't belong. He barely glances at his reservation book, his manicured fingers resting possessively on its leather-bound cover. Perhaps I could suggest somewhere more suitable? The couple standing before him exchange a look, one that speaks of countless similar moments, of quiet dignities swallowed, of rage contained behind practiced smiles. The woman, Maya Thompson, wearing a simple black dress that probably costs more than Marcus's monthly salary, tilts her head ever so slightly. Her husband, James, adjusts his wire-rimmed glasses, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. More suitable? Maya's voice is soft, but it carries the weight of 1,000 unspoken confrontations. The evening crowd of diners has gone quiet, wine glasses hovering mid-air, conversations suspended in the hushed anticipation of uncomfortable theater. I'm curious, Marcus. May I call you Marcus? What exactly would you consider more suitable for us? Marcus shifts his weight, his confidence wavering for the first time as something in Maya's tone sets off warning bells. The restaurant's crystal chandeliers seem to dim, casting deeper shadows across the scene unfolding beneath them. James reaches into his jacket pocket, and Marcus flinches slightly, though he'd deny it later. Actually, James says, his voice carrying the kind of authority that comes not from a uniform or a position, but from ownership. I think we'll be dining right here, after all. He withdraws not a weapon, not a complaint card, but a single business card, sliding it across the polished podium with the deliberate grace of someone who knows they've already won. It would be rather difficult for the owners to be turned away from their own establishment. Wouldn't you agree? The color drains from Marcus's face as his eyes fall to the embossed card, where James and Maya Thompson, proprietors, gleams in gold lettering beneath the La Maison logo he knows so well. The sound of a wine glass shattering somewhere in the dining room punctuates the perfect silence that follows. 20 years earlier, a much younger Maya stands in a cramped kitchen, her chef's whites stained with the evidence of a 16-hour shift. The steam from industrial dishwashers makes her curly hair stick to her forehead as she watches her culinary school acceptance letter dissolve under the drips from a leaking pipe overhead. 3 rejection letters had come before this one, but this was supposed to be different. We regret to inform you that despite your acceptance, your financial aid application has been denied. James finds her there, his own chef's coat bearing the burns and badges of a night on the line. He doesn't need to ask. They've shared this dream since they first met, 2 teenagers washing dishes in a diner, imagining their own restaurant empire. We'll find another way, he promises, his voice carrying the unwavering certainty that would become their foundation. We always do. And they did. Every no became a brick in the foundation of their eventual yes. They worked every position in restaurants across Atlanta: servers, line cooks, hosts, bartenders. They learned the business from the ground up, saving tips in coffee cans, studying business books borrowed from the library during breaks. While other young couples planned weddings, they planned profit margins. Their first date night in months was spent huddled over loan applications at their kitchen table. The first restaurant was a food truck, Soul and Spice, parked in a lot they could barely afford. Maya's grandmother's recipes merged with James's innovative twists, creating lines that stretched around the block. They worked in sync, Maya's precision complementing James's creative chaos. But even as the food drew praise and press, they noticed the subtle shifts when customers realized who owned the truck. The surprised looks, the hesitation, the occasional pulled-away children. They'll see us differently when we're successful, James would say on the hard nights. Maya would shake her head, already knowing better. Success didn't change how people saw you. It just made their prejudice more expensive to maintain. Their empire grew steadily. The food truck became a cafe. The cafe became a restaurant. One location became three. Each success was hard-won, each victory accompanied by its own set of challenges. Banks that wouldn't loan to them until their white friend posed as the owner. Suppliers who mysteriously lost their orders. Food critics who seemed to grade them on a different scale. But they persevered. The Thompson Restaurant Group became known for excellence, for innovation, for treating staff like family. They made it their mission to hire people others overlooked, to create opportunities they wished they'd had. Their restaurants became more than businesses. They became proof that excellence doesn't ask permission to exist. When La Maison came up for sale, it represented everything they'd once been told they couldn't have. The restaurant was an institution, a bastion of old money and older traditions. The previous owner, retiring after 40 years, had looked right through them during the first meeting, speaking only to their lawyer. But their money was as green as anyone else's, and their vision for the place was undeniable. The purchase was finalized quietly. They decided to keep it under wraps, to observe how the staff operated before making any changes. "Let's see who they really are when they don't know who's watching," Maya suggested, thinking of all the times they'd been judged without knowing they were being judged. James agreed, remembering every time he'd had to swallow his pride, every time he'd watched Maya do the same. "For once," he said, "let's see how the other side lives." They didn't expect to find themselves standing here, at their own podium, being denied entry to their own establishment. But then again, perhaps they did. Perhaps this moment had been waiting for them all along, like a bill that finally comes due. The plan came to Maya one morning, as she reviewed the staff files spread across their home office. La Maison's employee roster read like a society register, carefully curated, deliberately exclusive. She thought about the interviews they'd conducted over the years, the subtle ways prejudice masked itself as experience and cultural fit. "We need to see it for ourselves," she told James over breakfast, pushing aside her untouched coffee. "Not as the owners, not as successful restaurateurs, as regular people trying to have dinner." James looked up from the quarterly reports, understanding immediately. They'd played this game before, though never by choice. The careful calibration of appearance, the mental preparation for potential slights, the silent calculations of how to respond. But this time, they'd be the ones in control. "No designer labels," Maya continued, warming to the idea. "No reservations. Nothing that screams, we own 3 successful restaurants and just bought this one. Just us, trying to have dinner at a nice restaurant on a Friday night." James removed his glasses, cleaning them thoughtfully, a habit from their early days when he needed moments to process setbacks. "You think they'll turn us away?" "I think," Maya replied, her voice carrying the weight of experience, "that people show you who they are when they think no one important is watching." They planned it carefully, like they'd planned everything in their lives. Maya chose a simple black dress, elegant, but not obviously expensive. James selected a sports jacket he hadn't worn since their food truck days. They removed their usual signifiers of success, Maya's signature watch, James's custom cufflinks. The only thing they kept was their wedding rings. Some things weren't negotiable. The reservation book showed plenty of openings for Friday night. They'd checked it themselves, noting the careful gaps left for VIP walk-ins. The maitre d', Marcus, had been with La Maison for 5 years, earning glowing reviews from the previous owner for his ability to maintain the restaurant's prestigious atmosphere. "What do we do if they actually seat us?" James asked as they got ready, only half joking. Maya paused in applying her lipstick, meeting his eyes in the mirror. "Then we'll know we bought a better restaurant than we thought." Her reflection smiled, but her eyes held the skepticism of someone who'd learned to hope for the best while preparing for less. As they drove to La Maison that Friday evening, they were quiet, each lost in thought. They'd built their success by exceeding expectations, by being twice as good to get half as far. Now they were about to deliberately step back into the world they'd worked so hard to rise above. "Ready?" James asked as they pulled up to the valet stand. Maya squeezed his hand, feeling the strength that had carried them through 2 decades of challenges. "Ready, let's go see who's really running our restaurant." They didn't know it yet, but in less than an hour, they would be standing at that podium, watching the color drain from Marcus's face as he realized his mistake. But first, they had to walk through those doors as strangers in their own establishment, about to learn exactly what kind of restaurant they'd bought. The first slight was subtle, so subtle that anyone who hadn't spent years in the service industry might have missed it. The valet's eyes sliding past their modest car to the Mercedes pulling up behind them. The slight delay in opening Maya's door, small things, deniable things. Inside, the hostess station stood empty. They could hear Marcus's voice carrying from the bar, laughing with guests who'd clearly been deemed more worthy of attention. Maya's hand found James's, their fingers intertwining in a gesture practiced through countless similar moments. They waited and waited. 3 minutes passed. Maya counted them silently, her restaurant owner's mind calculating the lost revenue from every table that sat empty while potential guests stood waiting. Through the glass doors, they could see 2 more couples approaching, both white, both dressed similarly to James and Maya. Marcus materialized at his podium just as the doors opened. "Good evening." His voice carried the practiced warmth of fine dining, but his eyes swept past James and Maya to greet the newcomers. "Welcome to La Maison." Maya stepped forward, her smile pleasant but firm. "We were here first," she said quietly, the kind of quiet that, in their own restaurants, would have immediately commanded attention from their staff. Marcus's eyes finally settled on them, his expression shifting almost imperceptibly. "Oh, I do apologize. Were you waiting long?" The question was perfunctory, his attention already drifting back to the other couples. "About 4 minutes," Maya replied, her tone maintaining its professional pleasantness. "We'd like a table for 2, please." The reservation book opened with a deliberate flourish. "Do you have a reservation?" Marcus asked, though they all knew the answer. His pen hovered over the page, not quite touching it. "No, we don't," James responded, his voice carrying the same calm authority he used in board meetings. "But we can see several empty tables from here." Marcus's smile tightened. I'm afraid those are all reserved." His fingers traced down the page they could now see was largely empty. "We're fully committed this evening. Perhaps I could suggest somewhere more suitable." The word hung in the air like smoke. Suitable. Maya felt James's hand tighten around hers, felt the years of similar suggestions, similar dismissals, similar careful ways of saying, "Not for you." The other couples shifted uncomfortably, sensing the tension, but not quite understanding it. Through the dining room windows, Maya could see their favorite table, table 12, with its perfect view of both the kitchen and the garden, sitting empty, its reserved sign a prop in this all-too-familiar theater. More suitable? Maya's voice had found that quiet place again, but now it carried an edge. The edge of someone who had spent 20 years climbing to a position where she'd never have to hear that word again. "I'm curious, Marcus. May I call you Marcus? What exactly would you consider more suitable for us?" The scene was building to its inevitable conclusion, the moment captured in their opening tableau, but now the weight of history hung behind it, their history, the history of every door closed, every table denied, every opportunity questioned. They were no longer just 2 people being denied a table. They were every dream deferred, every barrier broken, every success earned despite the Marcus Camdens of the world. And in James's pocket that business card waited like a key about to unlock 2 decades of preparation for exactly this moment. The silence that followed James's revelation was absolute. Even the kitchen's distant clatter seemed to pause, as if the whole restaurant held its breath. Marcus stared at the business card, his manicured fingers frozen mid-reach, as though touching it might make this nightmare more real. I don't understand, he stammered, his carefully cultivated professional demeanor cracking like fine china. The sale wasn't announced. We were told. What were you told, Marcus? Maya's voice was gentle now, almost sympathetic. That the new owners would maintain the restaurant's standards? The last word carried the weight of every euphemism they'd encountered over the years. The dining room had gone silent. Servers stood frozen between tables, water pitchers suspended mid-pour. Through the kitchen's swing doors, faces appeared and disappeared like theater ghosts, word spreading rapidly through the staff. Marcus's complexion shifted from pale to ashen as the full implications of his actions began to sink in. Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, I can explain. His fingers fumbled with his tie, that small gesture betraying the magnitude of his realization. Can you? James asked, genuinely curious. He leaned forward slightly, his voice pitched for Marcus alone. Because I'm very interested in hearing exactly what kind of explanation you have for suggesting our own restaurant might not be, what was the word, suitable? The maitre d's podium, that throne of petty power, now seemed to be the only thing keeping Marcus upright. Behind him, the sommelier had stopped mid-stride, wine bucket gleaming uselessly in his hands. At a nearby table, a woman quickly slipped her phone into her purse, but not before Maya caught the telltale glow of a social media post in progress. I would never, Marcus began, but the evidence of what he would and did do hung in the air between them, as undeniable as his signature on those suspiciously full reservation pages. Stephen, Maya called out, her voice carrying clearly to the head chef who had emerged from the kitchen, drawn by the unusual silence in his dining room. Would you join us for a moment? Stephen Chen, their first hire after the purchase, moved through the dining room like a man approaching a car accident. He'd known who they were from day one, had been part of their plans, their vision for La Maison's future. His face showed a complex mixture of emotions as he took in the scene. Mrs. Thompson, he said, nodding respectfully. Mr. Thompson. The simple acknowledgement carried with it a weight that made Marcus flinch. How many open tables do we have tonight, Stephen? Maya asked, though they all knew the answer. 7 at present, ma'am, including table 12, which I believe you mentioned was your favorite during our kitchen renovation discussion last week. Each word fell like a hammer on the edifice of Marcus's deception. Around the dining room, other staff members who had known the Thompsons' identity began to step forward, their presence a silent testimony to the web of lies unraveling at the podium. Maya turned back to Marcus, her expression now holding something worse than anger, disappointment. Would you join us for dinner, Marcus? I think it's time we had a conversation about the future of La Maison, about everyone's future at La Maison. The invitation landed like a sentence. Marcus looked desperately around the dining room, seeking support or escape, finding neither. The power dynamic had shifted completely, his small kingdom of selective exclusion crumbling around him. The next morning, La Maison's private dining room held an unusual breakfast meeting. Every staff member was present, from the executive chef to the newest dishwasher. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with one of their expensive steak knives. Marcus sat alone at one end of the long table, his usual impeccable appearance showing signs of a sleepless night. Maya and James stood at the head of the table, their presence now carrying a weight that had nothing to do with their designer clothes or success. James placed a stack of papers on the table, employee records, incident reports, reservation logs. 20 years of restaurant experience had taught them how to read between the lines of such documents. We're not here to fire anyone, Maya began, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. That might surprise some of you, given last night's events. It would certainly be easier. Her eyes met Marcus's briefly. But easy isn't why we bought La Maison. James stepped forward, his hands resting on the back of a chair. This restaurant has a reputation for excellence, he continued. The food, the service, the atmosphere, all exceptional. But excellence isn't just about what's on the plate or how you fold a napkin. It's about who you welcome to your table. The staff shifted uncomfortably. Some looked at their hands, others at Marcus. A few met the Thompsons' gaze directly. Stephen, standing by the kitchen door, nodded slightly. "Starting today," Maya announced, "the Maison begins a new chapter. We're implementing comprehensive training programs, not just in service standards, but in unconscious bias, cultural competency, and inclusive hospitality. This isn't optional. This isn't a punishment. This is an investment in who we want to be." Marcus finally spoke, his voice barely carrying across the room. I want to apologize. Not just for last night, but for everything. I never thought of myself as—" He trailed off, unable to speak the word that hung in the air. "As prejudiced?" James finished for him. "Few do. That's why it's called unconscious bias. The question is, what are you going to do now that you're conscious of it?" Maya pulled out a chair and sat down, a signal for others to do the same. "We're offering everyone in this room a choice," she said, her tone softening. "You can be part of transforming La Maison into a truly world-class establishment, one that measures excellence not just by its food or wine list, but by its humanity. Or you can leave with a generous severance package and our best wishes." The room was silent for a long moment. Then Stephen spoke up from his position by the door. "I'm in," he said simply. "This is long overdue." One by one, other staff members began to voice their support. Some enthusiastically, others more hesitantly, but each making a choice. Marcus remained silent, staring at his hands folded on the table. Finally, he looked up. "I'd like to stay," he said quietly. I want to do better." Maya and James exchanged a look, the same look they'd shared over a broken-down food truck, over rejected loan applications, over countless moments when they had to decide whether to give up or push forward. "Then let's begin," Maya said, pulling out a folder. "First lesson: hospitality isn't about keeping people out. It's about welcoming people in." 6 months later, La Maison hummed with a different kind of energy. The crystal chandeliers still sparkled, the wine list remained impeccable, but something fundamental had shifted. The dining room had become a tapestry of faces and voices that would have been unimaginable half a year ago. Marcus stood at his familiar podium, but his posture had changed. The rigid formality had given way to genuine warmth. He greeted a young couple, their clothes modest but neat, with the same enthusiasm he showed the city's elite. At a nearby table, a group of business executives sat next to a family celebrating their grandmother's birthday, the spaces between them bridged by the universal language of good food and sincere hospitality. In the kitchen, Stephen had transformed the staff meals into a cultural exchange. Line cooks shared family recipes, servers brought dishes from their heritage, and the menu slowly evolved to reflect this richer tapestry of flavors. The restaurant's famous French cuisine now carried subtle influences from around the world, a spice here, a technique there, each addition making it not less authentic, but more alive. Maya and James sat at table 12, watching their vision unfold. The restaurant's revenue had actually increased since the changes. It turned out that excellence, when truly accessible, had an even larger audience. Food critics noted that La Maison had somehow managed to become more exclusive by becoming more inclusive. Now people waited for tables not because of artificial scarcity, but because the experience was genuinely special. "Mr. and Mrs. Thompson?" A tentative voice interrupted their observations. They looked up to see Marcus, a reservation book still in his hands, but now accompanied by a young black woman in a trainee badge. "I'd like you to meet Sarah. She's part of our new hospitality apprenticeship program." Sarah's eyes shone with a familiar mix of determination and dreams. Maya recognized that look. She'd seen it in her own reflection 20 years ago. "Welcome to the family," she said warmly, gesturing for Sarah to sit. As Sarah began to share her hopes for her future in the restaurant industry, Maya caught James's eye. They'd built their success on the belief that excellence and exclusivity weren't the same thing. That true luxury wasn't about keeping people out, but about lifting people up. That the finest meals weren't just about what was on the plate, but who was at the table. Marcus excused himself to greet new guests, his voice carrying clearly through the dining room. "Welcome to La Maison, where everyone's story adds flavor to our table." The evening light filtered through the restaurant's windows, casting a warm glow over the diverse array of diners. Each table held its own story: celebrations and business deals, first dates and old friendships, all unfolding in a space that had learned to see the value in every guest. This was the true measure of their success, not just in the stars awarded by critics or the numbers in their accounts, but in the simple, powerful truth that everyone who walked through their doors had a seat at the table. That excellence in hospitality meant not just serving meals, but serving humanity in all its beautiful variety. As the sun set over Atlanta, La Maison stood as a testament to the possibility of change, to the power of confronting bias with grace, and to the simple truth that the most exquisite dining room is the one where everyone is welcome to feast on dignity, respect, and understanding. The next time someone asks about La Maison's dress code or reservation policy, they receive a simple answer: "Our only requirement is an appetite for excellence, and our only reservation is against prejudice." Because sometimes the finest things in life aren't about what we keep out, but who we welcome in.